as the European Union and the establishment behind it become increasingly totalitarian, paranoid, and unstable, the EU superstate is raising up and training its own transnational military police force. According to reports and its own propaganda material, the EU Gendarmerie, as the force is known, will apparently be charged with putting down protests and civil unrest, raiding illegal political meetings, propping up foreign governments, and even confiscating weapons. Police and troops from numerous African and Middle Eastern nations were also involved in the controversial EU force's latest EU-funded training exercises. Critics are fighting back, though, warning of the dangers of such a force and of the EU itself. The EU's military police force is merely one component of the broader transnational police state apparatus being quietly imposed on the formerly sovereign peoples of Europe. It includes everything from transnational police and transnational army units to EU air and naval operations. Virtually all of it has grown up in the shadows. But in recent weeks, a controversial training operation, which took place in Germany's North Rhine-Westphalia last month, has sparked concern and alarm across Europe and beyond as media outlets shined a light on the troubling developments. The story was first reported by Breitbart's UK operation before being picked up by British newspapers and alternative media outlets around the world. According to media reports, the training brought together 600 troops and police officers to prepare for international crises and civil war. The aim of the April 15, 2016, comprehensive live exercise will be capacity building of police and gendarmes who will participate in international stabilization missions and projects with a police component, the EU military police outfit said about its training scheme, which the EU said was aimed at preparing the hybrid military police force for future missions. Media reports said that forces from Islamic Turkey and Tunisia participated in the scheming, along with forces from the African nation of Cameroon. Similar exercises in past years have also included troops from the EU-funded African Union and the Middle East. Even though Germany's constitution prohibits the use of military forces for police duties, the exercise took place in Germany. But officials were not all enthusiastic about the scheme. European Affairs spokesman for the German government Andrij Hunko, for example, requested permission to attend the training, but was instead blocked from even coming close to the site. In statements quoted by the UK Express newspaper, Hunko said the transnational military force was preparing to shut down protests and even political meetings. The German spokesman also blasted the militarization of the police as extremely worrying and contrary in Germany to the principle of separation of police and military. Germany has long feared the abuse of military forces in policing, and considering its history, for good reason. Much of the agenda is being orchestrated by the European Union Police Services Training, UPST, which claims its scheming is aimed at contributing to international stabilization. It also claims to be promoting peace and security, and harmonizing the police forces so they can work together under the command of the EU, the UN, the African Union, and more. In reality, though, critics and analysts have suggested the real agenda involves imposing the unaccountable EU's agenda on reluctant and hostile populations by force, and managing the fallout when victims of the EU's scheming decide to resist. The UPST member governments include Bulgaria, where the nation's former communist rulers remain in charge under new names, along with another dozen European governments. In a 2013 propaganda video showcasing the EU police services training capabilities and possible future missions, action film audio accompanies video of unwieldy mobs and stormtrooper-like EU forces riding to the rescue in military vehicles. How do police forces prepare for managing international crisis? The narrator asks in the film. The aims of the project, according to the video, include enhancing the skills of police officers likely to be deployed on missions, exchanging procedures and experience, drawing up a European training program aimed at developing the rapid deployment capacity of police in international crisis situations, and more. UPST is an European Union project, co-financed by the European Union, it said. There were 2,400 police officers participating, along with some 24 governments from the EU, the African Union, and other countries, contributing to common security and defense policy missions. The motto, one language, one common procedure. The Spanish government and its Guardia Civil, or Civil Guard, which uses a fascio, symbol of fascism, in its logo, was in charge of training the first 600 operatives for the force. Among those shown in the film being trained were troops from Canada, Niger, and more. Appearing almost like terrorists, with black masks covering their faces, the EU military police are shown performing all manner of assaults. They are also shown hoisting an EU flag over what appear to be tombstones or monuments to fallen EU troops. As part of the first phase of their training, the multinational force learned about tactical combat, theory, VIP protection, intervention in populated areas, special weapons and tactics, SWAT, how to operate roadblocks and other controls, and more. In the second, practical phase, the trainees at the EU military forces headquarters learned about how to prepare and execute police missions. In a fictitious country called Lucron, the EU force mentored Lucron government forces, learned how to clear routes, and more. Scenarios included attacks on NGOs by refugees, how to perform crowd control, criminal investigations, protection of UN workers, VIP escorts, how to deal with the discovery of illegal weapons depot, arresting of dangerous criminals, using sniper rifles to take out targets, how to kidnap people and stuff them into the back of vans, and more. In short, the EU force, which undermines loyalty to nation-states and purposefully blurs the lines between policing and military operations, can be turned into a perfect tool of transnational tyranny. And maybe that is the point. A large component of the military police scheme is the EU's gendarmerie program, formerly known as Eurogenfor. It brings together military and police forces from numerous EU member governments, including France, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Portugal, Spain, Romania, and Lithuania. Even Islamic Turkey participated as an observer. According to its official website, the multinational police force works to contribute to the European Union's area of freedom, security and justice by mitigating threats and risks such as international terrorism and organized crime. The force is composed of police officers with military status, the Eurogenfor website explains. The European Gendarmerie Force, relying on more than 360,000 police officers throughout the European Union and reflecting the highest EU police standards, combines and benefits from the long experience of each of its members. The official description continues. This turns Eurogenfor into a useful tool at the disposal of EU, as well as other international organizations. The hybrid military police force is a perfect tool for the globalist establishment and its organs of global governance. For one, it has no loyalty to any nation or culture. Secondly, by design, it can be put at the service of practically any globalist organization, even outside the EU. The European Gendarmerie Force may be placed, both under civilian authority or under military command, at the disposal of the European Union, EU, the United Nations, UN, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, OSCE, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, and other international organizations or an ad hoc coalition, brags the Eurogenfor website. For now, at least, the EU Gendarmerie is purportedly for deployment outside of the EU. Sometimes it works with and trains local police forces. So far, the force has been deployed in Afghanistan, the Central African Republic, Mali, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and under the UN's disgraced command in Haiti. However, in a flurry of articles about the outfit's recent training, more than a few analysts and critics suggested that, eventually, the force will be turned loose within the EU, as well. Indeed, Analysts have argued that the treaties underpinning the EU specifically authorize the deployment of the force within the EU. And top EU officials have hardly been shy about their agenda. "We are going to move towards an EU army much faster than people believe," said EU Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker in October. And it is indeed happening, quickly. In recent months, the New American has reported on a number of developments surrounding the EU's radical efforts to empower itself with transnational armed forces loyal only to Brussels. Among other schemes, the superstate seized on the migrant crisis, which it has played a major role in orchestrating, to justify the creation of a so-called European Border and Coast Guard. The armed force would have the power to intervene within member nations even against their will, if Brussels claimed the situation was urgent, even if national governments specifically refused permission. The armed force would also usurp powers to supposedly battle crime and terror, according to the EU. Separately, as the New American reported last month, there is also a shadowy effort to merge the military forces of various EU members into a unified force loyal to Brussels. Already, the German and Dutch armies are being merged into a unified command, the nucleus of the future EU force that will be beyond the reach of voters and their elected parliaments. The European army is our long-term goal, but first we have to strengthen the European Defence Union, said German Defense Minister Ursula von der Leyen. To achieve this, some nations with concrete military cooperation must come to the fore, and the Germans and the Dutch are doing this. EU military missions in Africa are also picking up steam. And the EU's extremism is only growing. The EU is also in the process of building up its own already existing police force known as Europol. As the New American reported last year, the outfit has even created a special unit with a mission of censoring the internet and scrubbing it of material deemed to be extremist by the establishment and its political class in Brussels. As top European politicians have made clear, everything from calling homosexual activity a sin to criticizing the Islamic religion is considered extreme. And the list of extreme views continues growing larger by the day, as free speech rights come under increasing pressure. Separately, the EU has multiple military outfits in existence and under development. For example, the so-called UFA, the European Union Force, is described by the EU as a rapid reaction force under the EU military staff. The EU also has Eurocorps, an intergovernmental military corps of about 1,000 troops from various EU countries stationed in France. The superstate also has a European Maritime Force, or Euromafia, capable of carrying out naval, air and amphibious operations. All can be deployed under the command of the EU, the UN, NATO, or other globalist would-be governments. Connecting the dots and projecting the lines is fairly easy at this point. In the 1980s, this magazine warned that the globalist establishment was plotting to turn the free trade scheme ensnaring Europe into a full-blown United States of Europe with a federal regime. Back then, such fears were dismissed as a conspiracy theory. Today, it is a reality, and top EU officials shout their intentions from the rooftops. The last thing in the world that the unaccountable EU needs is its own personal militarized enforcement mechanism. The dangers are obvious. The public has no way of controlling the EU, and therefore it has no way of controlling the EU's armed forces. Yet that is exactly what is coming if Europeans do not speak up even louder. Eventually, globalists hope the whole world will be ensnared, which is why Americans must